Final preparations are underway for the South Korea-U.S.-Japan summit at Camp David in the hours to come as President Yoon touches down in Washington. And we take a closer look at what could be addressed at Camp David when it comes to dealing with supply chain disruptions as the three countries could possibly forge an early warning system. Watchers sound the alarm on China's economic slump deepening in the wake of a bankruptcy crisis among Chinese property developers, which could send shockwaves into the global economy. It's August 18th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol is now in Washington for the meeting with his counterparts from the U.S. and Japan in the coming hours at Camp David. They are expected to release 3 documents that underline a strengthening in their three-way cooperation. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji starts us off this evening.
President Yoon Suk-yeol has arrived in Washington a day ahead of his summit with U.S. President Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. The presidential jet landed at Joint Base Andrews, a U.S. Air Force base near Washington, D.C. on Thursday local time. Shortly after his arrival, he held a telephone conversation with Biden, who offered his condolences over the recent death of Yoon's father, who died on Tuesday at the age of 92. During the call, Yoon thanked Biden and First Lady Jill Biden for a condolence letter and flowers sent to his hotel room ahead of his visit. On Friday, the leaders of the 3 countries will gather at Camp David, the U.S. presidential retreat in Maryland, where they are expected to discuss strengthening and even regularizing three-way cooperation, especially on security and economic issues. They're expected to sign 3 documents, including 2 joint statements and a separate piece that's expected to contain details of how the 3 countries will work more closely together to deal with threats. The first joint statement, the Camp David Principles, will serve as sustainable guidelines for future trilateral cooperation. The second, the Spirit of Camp David, will encompass the vision and implementation strategies of the cooperation between the 3 countries. And a senior official from Seoul's presidential office confirmed Friday that there will be a separate document, the commitment to consult, an understanding that they will share information and discuss how to respond in the case of provocations that pose a threat to all 3 countries. The official said this could encompass a wide range of threats, such as those involving security, economics, and cyber, adding that this means the 3 will be able to share data in the case of a missile threat from North Korea or a trade dispute. Meanwhile, the White House also announced Thursday local time that President Biden had moved to Camp David for the summit. It highlighted that this is the first time that Biden has invited foreign leaders there, which demonstrates the importance being placed on the relationship with South Korea and Japan. The trilateral meeting will be the 3 countries' first standalone summit, as previous three-way talks have only taken place on the sidelines of other international conferences. While at Camp David, Yoon will also hold separate bilateral meetings with Biden and Kishida. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
And the leaders look to deal with supply chain disruptions centered around chips and other high technology, as the 3 countries could possibly forge an early warning system. Our business correspondent Shin Ha-young tells us more.
From an economic perspective, the global supply chain has emerged as one of the key agenda items for the trilateral summit between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan. Regarding supply chain issues affecting high-tech industries, the 3 countries are expected to discuss specific ways to enhance cooperation, such as sharing related information and establishing so-called early warning systems. One expert says the summit could be an opportunity for South Korea to uncover alternative supply chains of rare earth metals.
Well, Korea is currently very dependent on China for rare earth, and there is some concern that perhaps China will use that as a tool against not only Korea but the United States. So I think the United States has to be more active in trying to provide alternate sources of these rare earths to Korea, so that Korea can become more independent from Chinese influence.
Measures for export controls against China are another potential key agenda item of the trilateral meeting. The U.S. prohibited the export of semiconductor production equipment to China, and Japan also joined in the chip restrictions against China. In the meantime, a one-year moratorium, which is set to expire in October, was applied to South Korean companies Samsung and SK Hynix, which are two South Korean chipmakers with factories in China.
The US will likely continue to push Japan to join China chip curbs. South Korea could probably receive a similar request as well. The three leaders could come up with cooperative measures on chips taking into account Seoul's chip manufacturing skills, Tokyo's manufacturing equipment and materials, and Washington's design capabilities.
Meanwhile, according to an official from Seoul's presidential office, an issue regarding U.S. investment restrictions on China will not be addressed during the trilateral talks. About a week ago, U.S. President Joe Biden signed an executive order that will prohibit some U.S. investments in China's quantum computing, advanced semiconductors, and AI sectors, and require firms investing in other tech sectors to notify the government when such deals are being done. Instead, issues such as the leaking of sensitive data related to advanced technology could be discussed during the talks. 신하영, Arirang News.
As semiconductors and other high technology likely to take center stage at Camp David, our Lee Si-hoo looked around one of South Korea's largest chip-making sites to see what fosters the nation's breakthrough innovations.
South Korea is a key producer of some of today's most advanced semiconductors, and here at SK Hynix is where core R&D and production take place. Welcome to the chipmakers' headquarters in the city of Icheon, about 60 kilometers southeast of Seoul, housing the world's largest memory chips production plant.
We develop and supply advanced products like the industry's highest 3-to-1 layer NAND flash product, which was recently unveiled. As for DRAMs, we're cooperating with the global big tech firms to come up with various applied products such as high-performance, high-capacity DDR5, mobile LPDDR, and high-bandwidth memory.
High bandwidth memory used to power generative AI devices has revolutionized data processing by stacking and connecting multiple DRAM chips like a building. It's also taken South Korean chip makers to new heights amid the growing demand for next-generation semiconductor products that support AI technology.
We developed the world's first generation HBM product back in 2013, and we've been leading the market since, developing and certifying next generation products. With the market expected to grow drastically in years to come, I think that HBM will play an important role in our business.
And with discussions on technological cooperation between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan expected at the Trilateral Summit in Camp David, the ruling People Power Party lawmaker Song Seok-jun, who represents the city of Icheon, says he looks forward to such cooperation.
The U.S. has great strength in semiconductor design, Japan in materials, components, and equipment, and South Korea in the production of semiconductors that utilize such technology. With South Korea having leading firms such as SK Hynix, I look forward to close trilateral cooperation in fostering talent, R&D, supply chains, investment, and incentives.
An expert in digital strategy echoes the need for such partnership.
It's very important to have a global cooperation to pursue the frontline technology of semiconductor business together. Semiconductor industry requires a tight cooperation in the supply chain to advance the economy and the technology.
Now all eyes are on the three countries' next steps forward and the influence they will have on the global semiconductor industry. Lee Si-hoo, Arirang News, Icheon.
Eyes are also on to what extent Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo would discuss Taiwan or Ukraine issues at the meeting amid a rather tense relationship with Beijing and Moscow. Our Lee Dae-hyun tells us more.
As South Korea, the U.S., and Japan band closer together through the Trilateral Summit, where does China stand? Beijing has been opposing the summit, with Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin earlier this week saying that Beijing is against the country's patchwork of small circles that heightens confrontation. Chinese newspaper Global Times also claimed that the summit will trigger the new Cold War, adding that it harms the strategic security of other nations. However, Washington drew a line on this, with the State Department earlier on Tuesday saying that the summit should not be seen as provocative by China.
What this is about is deepening our partnership and collaboration on a number of areas that we believe are in the mutual shared interest of our three countries.
Now, the U.S. has been avoiding mentioning China when it comes to the trilateral summit. Citing an anonymous official, AFP reported that China will not likely be directly mentioned in the joint statement as Seoul refuses to show a firm stance towards Beijing. Although Beijing isn't best pleased about Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo's closer ties, China isn't showing clear actions on this matter. In fact, China rather started allowing group tours to South Korea last week. One expert says this may be due to China's current economic crisis.
This is somehow China's dilemma. Its economy is seeing a downturn, which means if it makes the wrong choice, that may have unwanted effects for Beijing. China's being cautious in its diplomacy right now.
He added that China may choose to strengthen its partnerships with North Korea and Russia following the summit. Meanwhile, there's interest over whether the three nations will discuss Taiwan or the war in Ukraine. Some experts say the result of this summit should expand on the Phnom Penh Declaration, where the three have reaffirmed the importance of maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. Citing an anonymous government official, the Japanese newspaper Asahi Shimbun on Thursday said that it's likely that a joint document will include the opposition to the use of force to change the status quo, referring to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and China-Taiwan relations. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
China's economic woes continue to worsen as property developer Evergrande has filed for bankruptcy protection in New York. Watchers fear this could possibly send shockwaves into the global economy. Lee Soo-jin tells us more.
China's property crisis continues to worsen, adding to a deepening economic slump. Evergrande, the world's most indebted property developer, on Thursday in a New York court filed for bankruptcy protection under Chapter 15 of the Bankruptcy Code. Chapter 15 not only provides mechanisms for dealing with insolvency cases that involve multiple nations, but it will also protect the company's U.S. assets while it tries to restructure its debts. Evergrande, along with a group of its offshore creditors, agreed to a debt restructuring plan in March. Evergrande has long been debt-ridden, defaulting on its debts in 2021 when it failed to meet interest payments on around $1.2 billion worth of international loans. The company, which was once China's biggest real estate firm, announced last month that it lost more than $81 billion in 2021 and 2022. This triggered a widespread property debt crisis, which dealt a severe blow to China's economy, as the real estate sector, directly and indirectly, accounts for around a third of its economic activities. It also makes up around 25% of the country's gross domestic product. China's real estate woes continue as last week another real estate giant, Country Garden, missed interest payments totaling $22.5 million that were due on August 6th. The nation's economy is already slowing, as China reported earlier this month that exports dropped by more than 14% on year and imports more than 12% in July. Beijing also announced that consumer prices tumbled last month for the first time in over 2 years. If the current situation worsens, analysts say China is likely to miss this year's growth target of around 5% without additional stimulus measures. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
The UN Security Council held its first open meeting on North Korea's human rights in 6 years, though China and Russia argued this topic was inappropriate. They did not oppose convening the public meeting this time. Lee Seung-jae has more.
The UN Security Council on Thursday convened its first open meeting on human rights in North Korea in 6 years. China expressed opposition earlier in the week, saying that a council meeting on human rights in the DPRK falls outside the council's mandate, politicizes human rights issues, and only serves to intensify confrontation and antagonism. The Chinese mission's spokesperson added that Beijing sees no added value for the council to have such a meeting and will be against it. China's deputy ambassador to the United Nations on Thursday also criticized the meeting, saying that the main responsibility of the UN Security Council is to maintain international peace and security and not to discuss human rights issues of a specific country. He added that if the UNSC discusses human rights in North Korea, it will only lead to negative results, such as heightening tensions in the region. Russia also shared its opposition to the meeting, saying that raising human rights issues with North Korea is hypocrisy on the part of the United States and its allies, as North Koreans suffered because of international sanctions against the regime. Russia's ambassador to the UN also slammed South Korea, the US, and Japan for strengthening their military power in the East Asian region. In protest, North Korea took no part in the meeting. Pyongyang's Vice Foreign Minister Kim Sung-kyung called the meeting despicable and said it has nothing to do with the universal conception of human rights protection. However, the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, argued that human rights issues are in fact linked to security issues.
We cannot have peace without human rights, and the DPRK is a case in point. This war machine, which stands in violation of multiple Security Council resolutions, is powered by repression and cruelty.
South Korea's ambassador to the UN, Hwang Jung-guk, also stressed the importance of human rights in North Korea, adding that such issues will ultimately endanger international peace and security as the regime uses resources that should be spent on the welfare of the people to develop nuclear weapons. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The first Gangwon Chuncheon World Taekwondo Cultural Festival kicked off on Friday. Running until August 24th, the 7-day festival aims to celebrate the best of Taekwondo and showcase the sport's diversity and inclusivity. The festival will include the Diamond Games, the Beach Games, the Demonstration Team Championships, and the World Para Taekwondo Open Challenge. It will also feature an online Punse Championships. Throughout the event, over 8,000 athletes from around 60 countries will participate. It's time for our weekly arts and culture segment. That means we have our culture correspondent Song Yujin in the studio. Welcome, Yujin.
Great to be here, Jungmin.
What do you have for us today?
Well, Jungmin, can you believe that it's almost the end of August? You know, time flies really faster every year, and with most of this year already gone by, when we look at the past 8 months, a lot happened on the cultural front. So, for example, in January, we had the world premiere of the musical Beethoven by musical titans Mihail Kunche, Sylvester LeVay, and then in March, we saw Harry Styles' first concert in Korea, and then we went on to see baritone Kim Tae-han becoming the first Asian male to win the Queen Elizabeth competition, and also ballerina Kang Mi-seon being named as Best Female Dancer at the prestigious Benoit de la Danse. Now, as we get ready for the rest of the year, you might wonder what's next in culture. So for this week, I have a preview of some of the big cultural events still to come. With just a third of 2023 left, there's still a lot to be excited about in the world of culture, especially when it comes to performing arts. Clearly, there has been a lot to be excited about as well. The total ticket sales for the performing arts scene in Korea during the first half of this year grew over 40% from last year. The number of shows increased by 24%. Taking the lead are musicals, making up nearly half of the ticket sales and having the highest number of tickets sold. Korean audiences will be able to enjoy 3 of the big 4 musicals this year. Cats concluded its Korean tour in June, while The Phantom of the Opera, returning after a 13-year hiatus, moved to Seoul last month after a 3-month-long run in Busan. Marking the 10th anniversary of its Korean production, Les Miserables will make its return to Korean theater in October. Classical music commands the spotlight as well, which offered the most number of shows during the first half of the year. More than 10 overseas orchestras are scheduled to perform in Korea between October and November. They include the London Philharmonic, Vienna Philharmonic, Royal Concertgebouw Orchestra, Czech Philharmonic, and the Oslo Philharmonic. World-renowned pianist Cho Sung-jin will grace the stage alongside the Berlin Philharmonic and the Leipzig Gewandhaus Orchestra. Pianist Im Yoon-chan, winner of last year's Van Cliburn International Piano Competition, will play with the Munich Philharmonic. The world of pop music is buzzing with anticipation too, with big names following in the footsteps of Harry Styles and Bruno Mars. Singer-songwriters Charlie Puth and Sam Smith are set to perform in Korea as part of their Asia tours. And don't forget the big and small screens. Although summer's big film releases have wrapped up, it's too early to be disappointed. At least that's what one film critic told us.
Two Korean films screened at this year's Cannes International Film Festival, Cobweb and Sleep, are gearing up for their premieres. There's also Dr. John and Lost Talisman starring Kang Dong-won. On the streaming front, Netflix Sweet Home will be rolling out its second season in the fall.
So, even as the year winds down, the cultural scene will stay vibrant, offering plenty of entertainment.
Still so much to look forward to. And you have been following related stories as a culture correspondent. Can you share anything else noteworthy in the cultural sphere this year?
Absolutely, Tony. So what stands out the most is the sheer variety of shows and performances that are offered. Now, not only are we seeing Broadway and Western musicals here in Korea, but we're seeing more Korean originals. For example, Ben-Hur that will hit the theater later this year, and not to mention the unprecedented number of overseas orchestras that will be performing in Korea in the fall. Now, industry insiders attribute this to a trend of orchestras picking odd-numbered years for their Asian tours, and this year happens to be the first one since COVID-19. And also pop superstars like Harry Styles, Bruno Mars, and now Charlie Puth and Sam Smith are also set to perform here in the country.
And Eugene, before we wrap up, are there any upcoming events that can be enjoyed by all age groups?
I actually have one recommendation. The Cirque du Soleil is returning to Korea. And last year, this was actually the best-selling show here in the country, gathering over 170,000 people. And globally, this show has amassed over 300 million spectators over the span of almost 40 years. And the theme this year is Lucia, which was inspired by the people, history, and mythology of Mexico. And as water and light are the main elements of this year's show, you can expect mesmerizing spectacles like a giant rain curtain showering water down on acrobats who will be performing hoop diving on treadmills, pole dancing, and also high-flying acrobats.
Can't wait for that. All right, thanks, Eugene.
Thank you.
The scorching heat will continue to stick around this weekend. Highs will stay at 32 degrees Celsius, but temperatures will feel hotter than the actual readings. Tropical nights will follow for both Saturday and Sunday with lows of 25 degrees or higher. Drink plenty of water and please continue to take extra precautions against heat-related illnesses. In the meantime, heat wave alerts are issued across much of South Korea. For parts of Gangwon and Jeollado provinces, heat wave warnings are in place. Chances are high that most of these alerts will stay in place for tomorrow as well. And for the daytime, southern parts of the country will be under the influence of a low-pressure system. For Jeollado and Gyeongsang-do provinces, 10 to 60 millimeters are in the forecast. For parts of coastlines of Gyeongsang-do province, we'll see downpours of 100 millimeters. Localized flooding is possible, so please be extra careful. Tomorrow, Seoul will be starting off at 26 degrees. And maximum temperatures in Seoul will be hiking up to 32. Daejeon and Gwangju 32 as well. Daegu and Gyeongju will be topping out at 31 degrees. And central regions will see rain next Tuesday, and showers are forecast to spread nationwide by Wednesday. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session coming up.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Straight through my heart.
웰컴. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone! In the episode of Inwangsan Tiger, we are talking about Taekwondo. This time, we are going to watch a musical about another Korean martial arts, Taekwondo.
손이 나가는 곳에도 태권도의 길이 있고 발이 닿는 곳에도 태권인의 맛.
Arirang, what matters?
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라 감당할 수 있겠니?
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
웰컴.
Us.
엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Friday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. President Yoon Suk-yeol arrived in Washington on Thursday to attend the first exclusive trilateral summit between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. The tripartite summit will start soon, and it is widely expected that two statements are going to be adopted: Camp David Principles and Camp David Spirit, along with the third one, commitment to consult, according to the news that just came in. The three countries are to bolster cooperation in areas ranging from security to economy by regularizing meetings, establishing hotlines, and launching various consultative bodies, institutionalizing the meeting to become similar to that of Quad and AUKUS. What specifics are expected to be included in the joint statement, and what significance does this summit have? For an in-depth analysis, we have invited Professor Chung Guyon of Gangwon National University. Professor Chung, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Bruce Klinger, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Good to see you, Mr. Klinger.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Now, Professor Chung, the three-way summit is soon going to take place at Camp David, and it is quite meaningful as it will take place independently, not on the sidelines of any multilateral forum. Now, how significant do you believe the summit will be?
As you said, this is the first time three countries' leaders meet together for the sole purpose of holding this trilateral summit. Window of opportunity has been pretty rare so far, but now we have a very internationalist president of the United States, Joe Biden, and we have South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol, who valued the importance of allies and partnership with the U.S. and Japan. And also we have Japanese Prime Minister, who wished to strengthen its defense posture. So altogether, it is pretty rare we can observe the existence of three leaders combination at the same time. And given that intensifying U.S., China, even Russia's great power competitions, this trilateral will serve as a great asset to balance those revisionist powers' behavior in the region. And three countries also can synergize each of their Indo-Pacific strategies to provide economic benefits and resilience across the region.
Right, I see. Very significant indeed. Now, Mr. Klinger, the site, Camp David itself, has great significance. The U.S. presidential retreat in Maryland has hosted meaningful diplomatic events in the past. What historical junctures did Camp David witness, and how is holding a summit there different from having one in Washington, D.C.?
It enables really a more intimate atmosphere, and it's really been the site for both very close friends meeting there, as well as sometimes contentious discussions. The most famous is the Camp David Accords of 1978, when the U.S., Israel, and Egypt were able to overcome differences and reach an agreement. So, but the focus this time will be on emphasizing the very close relationship amongst Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo. And I think there'll be a lot of emphasis on showing the friendship as well as the close working relationship amongst the three leaders.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Chung, according to the presidential office, the three leaders will adopt two Camp David documents, the Principles document and the Spirit document. Now, since we are going to tap into the specifics of the possible outcomes of the summit, which will be included in the Spirit document, why don't we take a look at the Principles, which will contain the vision for trilateral cooperation. What direction do you believe it will take?
Well, when it comes to the principle document, I think it is likely to include a very basic goal and principle of cooperation between three countries, that three countries will cooperate on peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula, ASEAN, and Pacific Island regions and beyond, based on the common value and norms. So it is basically the goal and scope of cooperation three countries will focus from now on. And given that there are multiple numbers of trilaterals and unilateral cooperation platforms across the Indo-Pacific, I think it is very important to clearly state the specific goal and details of cooperation so that three countries have clear understanding of the workings of this trilateral mechanism and reduce any misunderstanding, not just for them, but also others who are observing these historic events.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Klinger, let's also talk about the possible outcomes of the summit. So according to the Wall Street Journal, part of the three countries' agenda will be discussions on training for tracking and destroying ballistic missiles using radar, satellites, and weapons systems. What are the joint military exercises of the three countries like right now, and what would such a change mean?
Well, last year, the U.S., South Korea, and Japan resumed their military exercises, and then also separately, the U.S. and South Korea resumed their large-scale exercises. Those had been canceled since 2017 and 2018. So the resumption was able to repair the degradation of Allied deterrence capabilities, which had occurred since the cancellation of those exercises. The U.S., South Korea, Japan exercises generally are limited to anti-submarine warfare and ballistic missile defense. So we're going to see a regularization of those exercises, more of a set schedule rather than what has often been the case of an ad hoc response to some North Korean provocation. And we may see a commitment to expand the scope and the type of exercises to include air forces, probably not ground forces unless they take place down in Southeast Asia as part of a multilateral exercise.
Right, so could we say that the point is the regularization of the exercises and how the exercises are going to, become more comprehensive?
Very much so. They want to have a continuation of these exercises and a commitment to have them frequently. The U.S. and South Korea have committed to increasing the scope, the size, the type of exercises in a bilateral basis, and we may see that trilateral commitment coming out of the Camp David meeting.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Zhang, speculation is also high that the three countries may hold trilateral meetings on a regular basis, with media outlets saying that the country's UNSC officials will meet at least once a year and also set up a hotline. Now, what would this lead to?
Well, I think it is very important to have those measures to sustain this momentum for the time being, given that we have very uncertain strategic landscape in the Indo-Pacific and even beyond Indo-Pacific European continents. And also three countries happen to be all democratic. They are expecting general elections next year in case of South Korea and presidential elections for the United States. And unfortunately, the current leaders of opposition parties are very hostile to these trilateral cooperations. In case of United States, there might be Republican candidates who might be very likely to isolationist. And South Korea opponent parties are very negative about the idea of Indo-Pacific in the first place. So given that, given this uncertainty in the domestic level, but at the same time, the international level, I think it is very important to have these institutionalizations. It could be leadership level or foreign ministers level or working level or working group for different domains. I think three countries would regularize the current meetings and momentum, not to mention of this hotline.
Right, I see. So such measures will contribute in sustainability of such trilateral cooperation. Right. Now, Mr. Klinger, staying with seeking greater trilateral cooperation, during a written interview with Bloomberg News, President Yoon said he's leaving the door open for greater cooperation with the U.S. and Japan on extended deterrence, adding that he's open to separate consultations. Now, is this hinting at the possibility of having Japan in the nuclear consultative group?
It certainly appeared that way initially after the president's interview. But very quickly afterwards, the presidential office said that that topic was not going to be discussed at Camp David and would not be included in the trilateral joint statement. So that put a bit of a cold water on that initiative. That said, the U.S. does have bilateral consultations on sort of nuclear strategy, et cetera, with both Seoul and with Tokyo. I think eventually we'll get to a trilateral agreement, whether it's expanding the nuclear consultative group or layering on top of that a trilateral focus. But it makes a lot of sense to have trilateral or even multilateral discussions on that topic, given that there would be a multilateral response to any kind of North Korean conflict. So, but I think in the near term, it'll remain in a bilateral U.S.-South Korea and U.S.-Japan basis. But eventually, I think there will be an expansion of it.
Right, I see. We'll have to wait and see if we get to that point. Now, Professor Chung, mainly we have been talking about cooperation in the military and security sector, but according to the first Deputy Director of National Security, Kim Tae-yo, the three countries will launch multiple consultative bodies, not just in the fields of military information sharing and security, but also on AI, cyber issues, and economic security issues as well. Could we say that cooperation is becoming much more comprehensive? And if it is, why is it so important?
I think at the bilateral level, we already have this comprehensive level of cooperations. And those issues like cyber issue is pretty important, not only because we have constant cyber attack from North Korea, China, and Russia to these three countries, but also those threats are not defensible by individual effort of those three countries. And in that sense, three countries need to collectively address them in the first place. And this is more so, as I said, we're going to have elections next year. And also AI and other advanced technologies are source of they are not just technology, but a source of economic development in the future. So technological cooperation, building a governance on how to use and regulate those technologies is a very important task for the future generation as well. And when it comes to economic security, I think this issue become more important given that we are expecting a Chinese economic downturn. So we have to think about supply chain vis-a-vis China and ASEAN countries, and how we can make our economic security more resilient at the three-country level.
Right, I see. Now, we have been talking about these two documents, the Camp David Principles and Camp David Spirit, but another document that is going to be issued is Commitment to Consult, which is taking a pledge to have some sort of duty to consult in the event of crisis that affects security of any one of the three countries. Now, could we say this is to lock in improved Seoul-Tokyo ties, as Financial Times had previously expected the U.S. to aim for, Mr. Klinger?
It does seem like an increase in the trilateral consultative procedures. It's a little unclear what that means. Is it only a major conflict or major provocation by North Korea, or is it any kind of even minor provocation along the DMZ or in the West Sea? And does it require not only consultation, but concurrence by the other two nations before any of the nations respond? So I think we'll have to see more explanation of what that means. You know, on the one hand, it would seem just very natural for the three countries that would be most directly impacted by any kind of provocation or conflict with North Korea to be consulting with each other. But a commitment to consult is more than that. And again, it's unclear whether that's also a commitment to concurrence from the other two nations. So I think we'll have to see what the details of that agreement are.
Right, so details remain to be unveiled, and we'll have to wait and see what they're going to be. Now, Professor Chung, however, Washington's attempt to, bring Seoul and Tokyo together is quite clear, but there are lingering issues, including those related to history and, of course, Japan's plan to release Fukushima wastewater. How should these be dealt with if this trilateral partnership is to go smoothly?
Well, it might have been much better if three countries do not have any grievances, but there are always a good side and bad side in any relationship. I think three countries seem to share the strategic urgency on changing strategic and economic landscape in the Indo-Pacific, given the pace of great power competition. So they prioritize these trilateral cooperations. But I think the three countries still need to discuss those issues in many channels, not only about history issues, but also about this Fukushima water waste issue as well. Even between civil society, even if the speed of resolution is slow, I think that gesture and that effort will make three countries' relationship more resilient.
Right, I see. Now, I'd like to ask Mr. Klinger about the same thing before we move on to the cooperation on the economic security area. How do you believe the two countries should, go toward to the better future by dealing with such lingering issues?
Well, on the Fukushima water release, Tokyo has been very transparent, the U.S. Has said, about its procedures, about its plans. and it's being done in conjunction with international organizations such as the IAEA. And the water that will be released is much less contaminant than that which China has been releasing from its 4 nuclear power plants along the coast. So there's been a great deal of focus by South Korea on the Japanese Fukushima water release, but no focus at all on the far more dangerous or more contaminant of the Chinese release. On history issues, certainly that is a very contentious, very sensitive issues, which has plagued the bilateral relations in the past. But President Yoon seemed to indicate back in March a focus on delinking the history issues from present-day threats of this millennium rather than a continued focus on threats from the last millennium. So I think those issues, of course, will have to be worked on, but they're no longer going to be linked to present-day security threats and the need for greater cooperation bilaterally and trilaterally, not only on security issues, but also on economic and regional issues.
Right, I see. Now, Mr. Klinger, now that we talked about this lingering issues between Seoul and Tokyo, let's move on to the cooperation in the economic security area. So according to President Yoon's written interview with Bloomberg News, the summit will discuss strengthening economic cooperation, enhancing the supply chain, and establishing an early warning system. Could you give us details about this and how important they are?
Well, in my discussions with U.S. officials this week, they've been very reluctant to provide a lot of details, but they all emphasize that the agreements will be quite comprehensive, quite significant, not only on the security side, but also on the economic side. And what we've seen in recent trilateral as well as bilateral meetings between the U.S. and its allies is a great focus on economic security. And in a way that's a phrase for diversifying away from China and over-reliance on the Chinese economy, as well as taking measures to have greater supply chain guarantees. We also, during the COVID crisis, that China's inability to provide supply chain guarantees or sufficient supplies had an impact on all of our economy. So the measures are being undertaken to try to ensure a freer flow of supply chain and products so that not only in result to any kind of economic coercion by China, but just sort of glitches in the supply chain would impede the economies of any of our countries. So we'll have to see what the details are, but I think it will be a greater commitment to move away from reliance on the Chinese economy.
Now that we have brought up the issues on China, why don't we move on to the responses from other countries? First on China, Professor Chung. China has been criticizing the Camp David summit as an attempt to create a mini NATO. Now, what is China's concern?
Well, China used to criticize Quad as an Asian NATO. Now they are talking about trilateral as a mini NATO. So they do have a concern for NATO, I think. That's just my joke. But for China, it is much easier to deal with individual countries, not 3 countries closely aligned in terms of security and economic domains. Not only this trilateral can serve as a stabilizing forces and, in fact, most stronger stabilizing militaries in the region, given the size of U.S. forces and stations in South Korea and Japan, and already existing bilateral military partnership and higher level of readiness. So it could serve as a very stronger kind of balancing forces against the expansion of China. And also beyond that, 3 countries' security cooperations, they will cooperate for economic, technological issues as well, and also scale up their cooperation and contribution across the Pacific regions and ASEAN as well. So given that Chinese economic deflations, they are kind of approaching, it is naturally reduce the leverage and influence of China in the regions. But 3 countries are not antagonizing China, but they just want to maintain stability in the region. So it could feel as a kind of threat to Chinese perspective.
Right. Now, Mr. Klinger, we cannot leave out North Korea. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has recently been visiting arms facilities, and South Korea's spy agency even warned that Pyongyang is preparing for an ICBM launch. Now, what moves might North Korea make to push back against stronger ties between Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo?
Well, as you point out, the NIS said that they've seen indications that North Korea may conduct another ICBM launch, whether it's a Hwasong 17 or 18 is unclear. Or they could try another launch of their military reconnaissance satellite. They've had a couple failures, but Kim Jong-un has vowed that will take place again in the near future. Also, they could do some kind of stronger military action along the DMZ or the West Sea. And we saw last year when the two and also the three countries with Japan resumed the military exercises, North Korea did a lot of ground force, air force, and naval force activity close to the border with South Korea. So we're unclear what North Korea's actual actions may be, but they may do something to try to indicate their displeasure, not only with the improved ties that are represented in the Camp David Accords, but also the resumption of the annual Ulchi Freedom Shield exercises, which are very large scale between South Korea and the U.S., and those start Monday and run through August 31st. So in the next 2 weeks, we're likely to see some kind of North Korean action, whether it's missile launches or conventional force activity.
Right, we'll have to see what happens. Now, Professor Chung, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask you this last question. So, strengthened ties between Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington would much more likely make ties between Russia, North Korea, and China to be bolstered again. And that would mean much more tension on peninsula. So, what direction should South Korea take in order to deal with this kind of situation?
Well, South Korea, as we strengthen our alliances with the United States and reconcile with Japan and supporting this effort of trilateral cooperation, I think we made clear our interest in the regions. Even though that actually kind of as a counter reactions of those countries, we are kind of we are aligned with those countries who share values and interest, who actually support the rule-based order. So it is kind of expectable that we're going to see more tensions on the Korean Peninsula, not just Korean Peninsula, but all the kind of rest of Western Pacific regions. But at the same time, we need to stronger, more alignment with three countries or other partner countries in the region so that we can work together to stabilize the situation.
All right, I see. I'd like to ask many more questions to our experts, but unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Well, thank you, Professor Chung and Mr. Klinger, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be next Monday with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the weekend, and goodbye.
I'm live! 저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고